This is Warren Vanderhill interviewing Charlie Anderson for the Muncie Labor Oral History Project on January 18, 2006. Charlie, I want to begin by thanking you for agreeing to participate in this project, which I think is an important one for the history of Muncie, Indiana, even though you now live in Anderson. But I'd like to begin by having you tell me a little bit about when you and your family came to Muncie. When did you come there? How did you happen to get there?
Well, I wanted to I wanted to go to college, and we moved there in 1947. I had gotten a job at Ball Brothers. I'd been in engineering in the Navy, and I got into the tool room. And I finished my schooling up in about 2 years. Worked nights in the tool room at Ball Brothers. And then another fellow there.
That's okay.
Well, trying to think of his name.
No, that's all right.
Anyway, on days, Percy Lawson, the superintendent, called me over on days, and Matt George, and Matt had been sent to Detroit and gone to school up there, cutting carbide. All of our dies at Ball Brothers were carbaloy, and in order to cut them, you had to use diamonds. And I worked with Matt for about 3 months. He taught me how to cut the diamond, or taught me how to cut the carbaloy. And I went back on nights. I continued to work for Ball Brothers until the beginning of the Korean War.
Oh, okay.
And at the beginning of the Korean War, I had a chance to go to Allison's in Indianapolis, and I went in and I talked to Percy Lawson. He was our superintendent, and when I finished talking to Percy, he told me that he couldn't give me in the next 10 years what I could get at Allison.
Oh, okay.
To go ahead and move. So I made the move down to Allison's. There were 6 of us tool and die makers driving back and forth from Muncie to Allison's. This was at Allen Speedway.
Oh, okay.
And we were on the road 3 hours every night. We worked 10 hours every night. Most of the time, 7 nights a week. Willie's Overland started an aircraft engine plant up in Anderson. The other 5 fellows that had gone over with me all quit and went to Willie's. We would stop at a restaurant on the way home, and supervisors from Willie's would come in and try to hire us because you could not get skilled help. Finally, they stopped in and asked me again, and Willie's was paying 10 cents less on the hour than they were to Allison's. And I told him, I said, I won't go to work for you unless I get that done. And he told me, he said, Charlie, if you keep quiet, he said, we've already decided these fellows are going to get retroactive pay. He said, I'll hire you in at your rate. So I went to work at Willie's, and I worked there for 2 years, and we worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. My foreman went to a meeting one morning. He came down, and I was on a big lathe, and he come up and he said, Charlie, he said, shut your lathe down, grease your part up, just go get a cup of coffee. I said, what are you talking about? He said, Charlie, I just come out of a meeting, and he said, we are closing the plant.
Oh.
And so the plant was moved from there. C.E. Wilson was Secretary of War at that time. And he was pulling everything out of other areas into General Motors plants.
Oh.
So they moved that over to Delco Reaming.
Oh. Huh. In Anderson.
In Anderson. And then I went from there to Anderson Tool and Engineering, and I worked there for some time. And then the bottom fell out of everything. I was still working. They laid off a number of people, and in a job shop, they come around that evening and say, "This is it, you're through."
Yeah.
My foreman, I had looked, and I found a job in Dayton, Ohio, at Sheffield, and I found a job in Fort Wayne, and that was the only two openings I'd found.
Mm-hmm.
I called Percy Lawson, who had been my superintendent at Ball Brothers, and I asked Percy, I said, "Percy," I said, "I'm going to be out of a job in another week." Percy said, "Charlie, I fired a guy last night for drinking. Come in to work tonight."
I'll be darned. And that's how you got back to Ball Brothers? What year was that?
I don't know. I've got it.
Sometime in the 50s.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay. But when you had these different jobs at all these places, as a tool and die maker, were you basically doing the same thing as far as that skill? Oh, okay.
In Indianapolis, at Allison was probably the best tool room that I ever worked in my life. We were working in millions. We worked in tenths all the time, but they had what they called millionth meters.
Million?
Right, and they were closed and glass, and when you got ready to check your work, you pulled it out, brought it down, and it was just as easy to check that as it would be with...
You mean millions as a measurement?
As a measurement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it was all aircraft work.
Wow.
But when I was still at Allison's, we had 3 foremen, and they rotated. I worked on the second shift. And this one foreman come around one night, and he said, "Charlie," he said, "you can run an internal grinder, can't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And they had a very big tool room. And one area was never lit up.
Yeah.
So we went over there, and he turned the lights on. And he told me, he said, "Now an inspector's going to be with you on this job until you finish it." So we walked over to the machine. It was an internal grinder, but it was an internal grinder that you had to get on a ladder and walk up to the machine itself. And what they did, they cut 4 tanks. They cut the rotating rings for your tanks. And so we proceeded for about a week to do that. It wasn't any problem at all, because he did all the checking and everything come out all right. And he told me before he left, now he said, "I'm going to tell you this," he said, "all grinders are alike." He said, "There's a switch and you turn it on here and off here."
But when you went back to Ball Brothers, did you go back to doing the same thing you did?
I went back as a tool and die maker.
Okay.
I was president of Ball Brothers 6 terms. I was president of Ball Brothers 3 terms. The International Union, that's when Ball Brothers began to leave. And
Well, they're getting ahead of the story here.
Okay.
So when you get back to Ball Brothers, just for our tape and the record for posterity, what was Ball Brothers making at that time?
At that time, Ball Brothers had the largest zinc roller mill in the world. We produced about 90% of all the shell casings for your batteries.
Oh.
We were producing at that time for the armed services all of the big square batteries that they put on their walkie-talkies.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
The glass house was producing 70% of the total supply of whiskey bottles.
Whiskey bottle.
70%.
Wow.
in the United States.
Yeah.
We also had a white liner. We had a box factory. Your door casings that seal your door.
Right, they were doing
We were making the door casings for a number of different companies there. And they had an experimental department that they were always working on other things.
Okay. Did you recall back in those days when this was pretty full employment at Ball Brothers, how many people worked out there?
There was a little over 800 people.
Okay. Is that sort of the high water mark of Ball Brothers the time you were there?
Yeah, they were running full blast when I was there until they began to. The thing of it was, all of the machinery at Ball Brothers was worn out. It was a very old factory.
Oh, okay.
Even the tool room, we had belt-driven machinery up there.
Yeah.
And there had been no belt-driven, but there wasn't anything wrong with it. You could do just as well with it as you could the other.
But it was old technology.
It was old technology.
When did you become involved in union activities?
Became involved in union activities soon after I came back from the Navy.
Okay.
For a very short period of time, I was in Richmond. And they had a mower factory there. I got a job there, and
Those lawnmowers?
mm-hmm.
Okay.
We started to negotiate a contract, and I was put on the negotiating committee. And this was back when the federal government was setting in on your negotiations. They had an arbitrator in your meetings, and we had tried for nearly 2 weeks with the manager to get something done, and he would sit back each morning, put his feet up on the table, and light up a cigar and say no to everything. So after the second week, we knew we couldn't get any place, and we told the people, and we just walked out the door and pulled the power off.
Okay.
And 2 weeks later, the fellow from Washington had called Detroit, which was their home office, notified them what happened. The plant manager was fired immediately. They brought another man down. We had a contract 3 days later.
So the strike was a wildcat strike? You just walked out and shut it down?
Just walked out and shut it down.
But 2 weeks later, they were back at the table.
Yeah, because he wouldn't even talk, discuss anything with us. He just sat there and thought that thought he was doing the right thing, and he found out he didn't have a job.
So when you're back at Ball Brothers, then you became involved in the union there?
I became involved in the union there too.
Okay. Now, for the record, that's local
93
of the
United Glass and Ceramic Workers of North America, which included all of the plants in the United States and all the plants in Canada. They were all organized.
So it's a pretty large union.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell me some more about the union activities that you were involved in, because that's one of the focal points of our project.
We tried to not only work as far as the union was concerned, but civic programs. Anything that came up and you were asked to be on the committee, you tried to serve on that committee. I have a number of those listed.
Well, I can add that to my interview.
Okay, all right. You can just put it in here.
But I'm basically getting at the point that when you, as a union official, were asked to, participate in civic activities, that you were very responsive to doing that. You thought that was an important thing for a union leader to do.
It was.
Was that generally the attitude of most of the union leaders in Muncie at that time?
Yes, a great number of them, and we, because we were a part of the community, and we were trying to better the community, just like Emmons Auditorium.
Yeah, sure.
I served on the committee on Emmons Auditorium and was one of the 4 speakers the 2 nights that they had the program that they opened up Emmons Auditorium.
Emmons Community College Auditorium, I think it's officially called, or College Community Auditorium or something.
Yeah,
like that.
right. Well, they probably changed it now.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's important
Yeah.
because I had an office with Dr. Emmons after he retired from Ball State, and I was just starting out there, and he was very proud of the fact that that auditorium was a college community initiative. It wasn't just the college, and it wasn't just the community. And you know how important a role Emmons Auditorium has played in the history of,
Oh, yes.
of Muncie.
I mean, not only Muncie, but the entire area.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's a regional thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I've known a number of the presidents, and I think that he had more visions, more ideas, I think, than any other president that we've had.
I laugh about that a lot because he had just left when I came there. And I made the statement to somebody that he looked more like a president than any of the others.
Well, now a lot of people never knew this, but we even thought about the cost factor when Emmons was built.
Oh, okay.
You had 3 other buildings that had been built. Side walls were already completed. So the only thing we had to do with Emmons Auditorium was put the front on the auditorium,
yeah, right.
and then finish the rest.
Yeah, because you had those academic departments on either
Right.
side like that. Yeah, that's a good point.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I might say this, that the acoustics at Emmons is some of the best acoustics in the
Yep.
world, because they had a fellow from Germany came in and they
Yeah.
worked on the acoustical part of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tell me some of the other jobs that you did within the union. I mean, now I'm talking about you at Ball Brothers. What kinds of things did you get involved with as a union official, especially as a president?
Took care of all the grievances that Ball Brothers had. When I became president the first time, we set a meeting up, and the glass house was very big, and I set a meeting up every Tuesday morning, and I tried to resolve the grievances, because you're a lot better off if you can solve them before you get to an arbitrator.
Yeah.
The first meeting we attended, I had my little contract book with me, and the first 3 grievances we got wasn't connected with the contract, didn't have anything to do with it. And I said, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They said, well, we've got a side agreement. Well, went back in the next week, and 2 of these grievances that I'd had on days
Yeah.
were different on nights.
Oh, okay.
And they went another direction with it. And I said, wait. Well, they said, we got a side agreement here, and they got it out. And Ralph Reeser was the president, international president of the United Glass Workers.
Do you know how to spell his last name?
R-E-I-S-E-R.
Reeser.
Yeah. You know Pete.
Yeah, I was going to say
You know
that.
Pee Wee a lot better than you know Ralph.
Oh, okay.
Pee Wee's his brother.
This Reeser or Reese?
Reeser.
Well, that's Pete Reeser. He used to play
Yeah.
for the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played with Pee Wee Reese.
Yeah.
I'm from New York City. I'm a Dodger fan.
Yeah,
This is Pete Reeser's brother?
that's right.
Oh my gosh, that's a great story. Huh. Yeah, Pete was known mostly for crashing into center field
yeah.
wall
Right.
in Evans Field.
Got hurt a lot of times.
That's right.
But, get my train of thought.
Oh, you're talking about Reeser and then.
No, I know. But I called the international president, Mr. Reeser, up, and told him what had happened, and I said, now, I'm going to throw every grievance out that doesn't pertain to our contract.
Okay.
I said, these side agreements are gone. He said, you know what's going to happen? I said, yeah, they're going to file charges against me and try to put me out of office. But I said, I'm just telling you now.
Yeah.
So I called all the committeemen out, spent 4 days, and when we wound up, we had 5 grievances left. That's all we had. Well, they did file charges against me, and they brought an international vice president in, and they went through the whole thing, and when they got through, he told them, he said, well, he said, I'm sorry, people, but said, he has gone by the international constitution and bylaws, and he has gone by the contract, and this is the way it is. The first time that we went, we used the American Arbitration Association. The first time we went before the American Arbitration Association, we had 5 grievances. We won all 5 grievances. The next time we went before the American Arbitration Association, we had 7 grievances, and we won 5 of the 7. And after that, it seemed like it was a lot easier to settle grievances with Ball Brothers.
I understand.
A few times we went before the arbitrator.
At this time, was Ball Brothers running 3 shifts?
Well, yes.
Okay. And you mentioned the glass house. I mean, was that the largest percentage of their business when you were working there?
Well, I would say yes, it was. Now the stamping department was big because we were producing all of the shells for like Ever Ready, Revac, Burgess, Bright Star,
all the batteries,
all of them. Yeah.
Well, it's funny when you mentioned the number of people who worked there when they really had what you would call full employment. So I mean, they were quite a bit smaller as an operation in Muncie than, say, Chevrolet or Warner Gear.
Yes, they were. But our productivity there, and this is one thing that we worked on, our productivity there was very high.
Oh, okay.
To give you a story on productivity, in the lids and ring department, the closures, a fella had married into the Ball family. He was a nice fella, but the only thing of it was he was cutting the rings out from under that ladder, and he didn't care who went with it. The vice president over the closure part had been in Europe, and while he was there, I won't mention this individual's name, but he cut the bonus from all the lids and rings, which meant all of the women on the lines went back to a base rate.
Oh, okay.
And tried to talk to him, didn't do any good. Called them all out and told them, I said, now, the way the contract is, we make base rate. I said, I know as hard as you've been working, it's going to be hard to do, but it's the only way we're going to win this.
Right.
So they immediately dropped down to what they were supposed to make, base rate.
Yeah.
This went on for 2 weeks, and of course the productivity, the bottom of it fell out. The vice president came back and went through his reports and saw right away, and he called me and he said, Charlie, my God, what's the matter? And I said, we've got a problem. And he said, will you come to my office? Well, I would never go anyplace unless I had somebody else in the union. I said, yeah. I said, I'll get Woody Yates, who was vice president, and I'll be over. So we went over, and I just sat down and told him the truth, told him what had happened. Yeah. I said, I understand what's happened to your productivity. Yeah. And this is why it has happened. Yeah. And he said, well, who on earth told him to do that? I said, I don't know who told him, but I said, now, can we solve this problem like we usually do? And he said, don't worry. He said, you go back over and tell those women right now to start in on their bonus. He said, they will be paid this week. And I said, well, I really don't think that'll solve the problem. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, they are owed an apology. He said, I will make him go around to each person and apologize to them. And he said if he doesn't, he said he might be a member of the family, but he says he will not be a adult by the family.
Oh, God.
This actually happened.
Well, you know, kind of picking up on that, because I've asked all the people in my project the same question. When you started there, how would you describe the relationship between labor and management? And what I'm really after is whether it changed over time.
You always have a problem, because management, in the first place, they don't want a union.
Right.
I mean, this is a fact that everybody knows.
You think that's particularly true of the Ball family?
You know, really and truly, I never had trouble.
Okay.
The reason I say that,
Yeah.
the first time I was there, just a kid, back from the service,
Right.
I had worked with a fellow by the name of Enoch McPherson, who had been at Ball Brothers for years. And we had so many changeovers in the stamping division with all these big presses.
Yeah.
And I had worked with him about 6 weeks, and this one night we had so many of them, and he told the foreman, he said, Charlie can change these presses and everything by himself. He said, we don't have anything to worry about. So they put me up on the 3rd floor, and we had, on this one line, we had 2 big presses. Well, I got both presses set, and you had to make your cans, and they had to be approved before they took off with them. Well, as I had finished it up, there was a bridge that went across the main office. And a little old fella, white-haired fella, came over and walked down to where I was at and started talking to me. I had no idea who it was. And in the conversation, I said, well, this is the first time I've done this. I hope I'm getting it right. He picked up some of the lids and looked there at some of the lids and looked at them. And he said, well, I think they're all right. And so he turned around and left, and it was the foreman down at one of the other divisions, and he kept looking back there, and when the old gray-haired fellow walked back across the bridge towards the main office, why, he rushed down there right away, and he said, what did he want? What did he want? What did he want? I said, he didn't want anything. He just standing here talking to him. He said, do you know who he is? I said, no, but he's certainly a nice old guy.
Yeah.
He said, he's Billy Ball. Well, after that, when Billy was over there of an evening, sometimes he would walk across the bridge, come across the tool room, come in and talk to me. Now this is Ed Ball was the same thing. Ed would have come in the tool room and ask me to do a job, maybe for the farm or something like that. And he'd always say, now, don't get into anything on production. Keep your production going. Well, this one time, Ed Ray, who was safety director, came over and told me that they needed 4 great big long pieces, and I had to have threads on both ends of them. Asked me if I'd get them, and I said, sure, I'll get them for you. Well, I had just gotten a new foreman. He came in from California. His name was Bruner. He was a nice guy, but he wanted everything done the way Bruner wanted it done. And it was my fault. I never thought to tell him. I had 3 of those pieces finished and put behind a big lathe. The 4th one, I had gotten the threads cut on one end of it and didn't have them on the other, and he walked down and he saw me and he said, Charlie, he said, that is government work and you will not do any government work in my shop, period. I said, that's it. So I set it back. And when Ed came over, why, he wanted to know if I had them done, and I said, Ed, I've got everything finished up with the threads on one end. And I'm not going to be able to finish it for you. Its face got red, and he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I said, my foreman has told me that there will be no such work done after today, or after this. And I said, you know, if I do it, I'll get fired.
Yeah.
He said, I'll take care of it. So he left, and the next day Bruner came out and he was all shook up, and he said, Charlie, you just damn near got me fired. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, Mr. Ball came over here, and he gave me to understand that was his work, and he could get a new foreman any day in the week. Well, from that time on we had, but that's the way we were.
Yeah. Well, do you think as things began to get bad as far as the company getting in difficulty and eventually closing up?
Things did not get bad.
Oh, okay.
The thing of it was, our productivity remained high. Productivity in the glass house was good. Every place. We had very old, dilapidated, worn-out machinery. And they had sat down and talked to us before about building a new plant in the industrial complex at the edge of Muncie.
Okay.
We negotiated 2 contracts with Ball Brothers. The second contract we negotiated knowing full well that they weren't going to be there.
Oh, okay. How did you know that?
I can't tell you.
Oh, okay. Well, you knew.
I was told.
Yeah, that they weren't going
There
to.
was not too many things that was done that I didn't know about, and I didn't sneak around to do it.
Right.
I didn't sneak around. But we had known where every plant was going to go.
Oh, okay.
That included the Greenville, Tennessee plant.
Right.
I went up to Mundelein, Illinois. So I organized a plant in Mundelein. But we know where each operation was going and the approximate time it was going to start up.
Okay.
And the company set in negotiations 2 different times telling us that they were going to build a new plant, or hope to build a new plant in the industrial complex in Muncie.
Which they really would have had to have done because the technology was so old. They would have had to have new technology.
They had to have new equipment. There was no equipment. We knew that.
Oh, okay. When did they close up?
I left before they closed.
Oh, sure.
Now, I can't tell you the exact date. I don't.
Was it sometime in the 90s? Or I'm trying to think when they. Well, it's before that.
Yeah, let's see. I left there the 5th, the 17th of 1954, and went to Delco, Remy. Nearly everything was closed down at that time.
In 1954? Okay, I thought they were.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Well, I thought they were still going after that. You came over to Anderson, to work for Delco Remy.
I came over here just at the beginning of the Korean War.
Oh, okay, yeah.
No, I went to Allison's. I worked for any place. I went to Allison's at the beginning of the Korean War, and that had been 50, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
How many years did you work at Ball Brothers?
Altogether, 21 years and 25 days.
Okay. Okay. Well, to go back to your point about Ball Brothers eventually closing, did you come over here because you could see that there was an end to that?
Well, it was gone then. There were 4 of us tool and die makers that was building big machines up. The machines we were building up was going to the zinc mill, the new plant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At Greenville.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there were what, a few hundred people still working out there at the time that they closed up?
There were very few people. because the glass house had already shut down. The zinc mill had actually shut down. We were just building machinery and stuff. The box plant was gone. Everything was gone, and they were still making lids and rings.
Okay, and that was about it.
That was about it.
Yeah. How many people do you need to do that? Do you have any idea how many workers they had over there for that operation?
Well, for the to put the ceiling part in, they had 4 fellows that mixed the batch. Now they used to use rubber, and they changed that compound and made their own compound. So they had 4 fellows that did all that, and probably not over 10 or 12 women to package.
Okay. I want to ask you a bigger question involving unions, and that is, as you look back on your experience as a leader in unions, what do you think unions have done for workers?
Well, when we first started out, we had absolutely nothing. We had no overtime. Your health and safety part of the program was pathetic. And the reason I say that, as a kid, when I was going to school at Cambridge City, I had an English teacher who told me that he thought that I could get a job at the Wayne Works in Richmond, which is a school bus body plant. I went over there with a group of fellas, and they told me what things that they did. I got over there. This was back during the Deep Depression. Got over there, and there was a long line. I got in the line, and I got up to this fellow, and he said, "What can you do?" I named 3 or 4 things that these fellows had told me as we came from the little town of Dublin to Richmond. And he said, "I can't use you." So I turned around and I got at the back of the line again, and I came through and got up to him, and he said, "What can you do?" And I named 3 or 4 more things that I told him, or that they told me, and he said, "I can't use you." I went back and got to the back of the line the 3rd time. I got up within 4 people of him, and he closed the window and went to dinner. And when he came back, and I finally got up to him the 3rd time, he said, "Well, young man, what can you do this time?" And I looked at him and I said, "I can't do a damn thing." He said, "You're hired." And he hired me 3 summers after that. But you ask about things that, young kids no older than I was, losing their fingers, losing a whole hand, or maybe all the way up to their elbow. When they lost it, that was it. They went out the door. There was nothing. There was no insurance. They didn't take care of them or anything else. That was it. That's why I got involved in the unions.
Well, when you were working at Ball Brothers in particular, what gains did you make in your contracts for the workers there?
What we tried to do, we had an idea percentage-wise. Now, we didn't do anything like General Motors did. We would try to get 5 or 10 cents more on the hour. I think it'll show you in here as far as the insurance and things like that's concerned. That was the percentage that we were working on. But we tried to keep the cost factor at a point where we wasn't going to put ourselves out of business.
Okay. So you
always look forward to that part of it.
But you also, I think, what I'm getting from talking to various union leaders like yourself, that there always was a kind of balancing act between so much for wages, so much for fringe benefits, pensions.
You had an idea of how much that company could pay, because of either they had lost the last year or they had made a profit. And if you don't make a profit, you're not in business.
Right. Right.
So you've got to look at it from a union, as far as I'm concerned. I'm only a small fraction, but you got to look at it from a union standpoint to keep your jobs productive, where the corporation is making money, and you can make a decent wage.
Okay. And that's the way that the union went at doing the negotiation, because I guess my question is, when you looked at Ball Brothers as part of this international union, were the things that you were trying to get in negotiating contracts set at this level, or were they set at the national or international level?
Well, the thing of it was, Ball Brothers was diversified. They were not just glass.
Right, right. But the union was Glassworkers Union.
The union was Glassworkers Union, but we were a very, very diversified corporation.
Right.
And we had so many other things in there besides the glass plant.
Oh, okay.
And you had to take all that into consideration.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Whereas a lot of other glassworkers unions were guys just doing glass stuff, and they weren't as diversified as
That's right.
as Ball Brothers. Okay. What do you think are some of the disadvantages of unions?
Well, a joint problem, and I'm talking corporation and union. Now, I'm taking this to Delco Remy.
Okay.
I was 46 years old when I was still working at Ball Brothers in Tourer. I came over here at Delco Remy one evening, put an application in, and I gave them a resume at that time of all of my union background and everything else, because if you don't give it to them, they're going to find out anyway. You don't lie to them, you tell them the truth.
Right.
I had my forms about halfway filled out, and the fellow came to the window and he said, "Mr. Anderson." I came up and I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I don't have these filled out." He says, "Can you go to work for us tonight?"
These are the days of full employment.
And Delco Remy at that time had 17,500 people. And I told him, I said, "Sir, I want to go to work for you in the worst way. But I said, I have never in my life burned a bridge behind me." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Well, what I'm saying is this. I always give a corporation notice. I just don't walk out and leave them." I said, "I've been able to go back and be rehired from nearly everybody that I've worked for. No problems." And I said, "I want to go to work for you." He said, "The job's open and it's yours." I went back, gave Ball Brothers a week's notice.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the end of the story.
Okay.
We were getting machinery ready for the Greenville, Tennessee plant. Big machine. They had trucks waiting there to put the truck on and take them out. Not the week yet. My son was still in school, going to school at Daleville, and one evening he left me a note. We were going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, this sounds far-fetched. We were going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes we wasn't getting home till 11 o'clock at night. I had 4 apprentices working for me.
Yeah.
As long as I worked, they worked. When I left, they left too. This one night, my boy left me a note, and he said, can't give the name, "Call Mr. So-and-so at Delco Remy." I didn't even know Mr. So-and-so at Delco Remy. It's too late. It's after 11 o'clock, so I didn't call him. Came home the next night, my boy was up. He stayed up, and he said, "Dad, he called again. Call him tonight." So I called him, and it was about 11:30, and I called him that night and apologized. And he said, "Mr. Anderson," now he said, "you don't know me, I don't know you." He said, "Don't quit your job." I said, sir, I've already given a week's notice.
Yeah.
He said, don't quit your job. If you quit your job, I can't hire you. In essence, what that means is you're going to be blackballed.
Yeah, sure.
but you know, you can't even talk about that.
Huh.
Well, 3 weeks later, Jack, he was in, can't think of his last name, but he was at Ball Brothers, and he called me down Friday evening, and I knew when he called me down what it was going to be. I was going to get my discharge. And so I went down there, and he thanked me for working for him all the years, and he said, I apologize to you for what's happened, Charlie. He said, I'm glad you still got a job to go to.
Yeah.
But he said, we had to have these out. He said, we can't hire somebody off the street now, everything's down.
Yeah.
I said, I understand that. I got ready to leave, and he said, when do you go to work? And I said, Monday morning. He said, fine, will you work for us again tomorrow? So help me. So I went back in and worked Saturday, and then the following Monday I went to Delco Ring.
But Ball Brothers was still going then? I mean, they still had...
Well, the only thing we were doing was building machinery and stuff. The only lines that were going, as I told you, was your lids and rings.
Yeah.
Everything else was gone.
What role during your time as a union leader did racial issues play in union activities? I'm particularly interested in Ball Brothers.
Okay, that was one thing that I tried never. Race, religion, or whether it was a man or a woman.
Well, women's my next question.
I tried to treat everyone the same.
Okay.
And I'll give you one story on that. We had a black fellow that worked over in the glass house. He had 3 lovely children and a marvelous wife. And this guy screwed up time and time again. I got his job back for him, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. And I told him the last time, I said, now, what he had done, he had gone over and got whiskey and brought it back to the guys in the hot hand, and they caught him. So I told him, I said, if it happens again, I said, I'm not going to process a grievance for you.
Is the hot end the furnace end? Is that what
Yeah, that's the hot end. And he got along all right for about 4 or 5 months, and then he pulled another big screw up. Not only hurt himself, but he hurt 4 or 5 other people. I mean, financially.
Yeah.
And he came to me, and I said, no. I said, if it was a legitimate grievance, I'd file it, but it's not. He said, and if you don't file it, you know what's going to happen. I said, yeah. Well, I got a phone call from an attorney in Dayton, Ohio, and he didn't ask me, he threatened me, he gave me to understand. I said, well, I said, I know everything.
Yeah.
And I said, now, I've already told him, and I know by law that I have to file a grievance. But I said, I'm not going to do it. I said, he's had more chances, and I said, he's hurt more people. I said, you got a wonderful family, and I said, this really hurts me more than it does him, because he don't care. What happened? Ball Brothers came to me, the International Union came to me, and they said, file a grievance, file a grievance. I didn't do it. They did let him go, but they both, the International Union and the company, were scared to death that they was going to file a lawsuit against him.
I mean, a civil rights thing.
Right.
Well,
and this is an awful position to put yourself in.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Were there a fairly large number of African Americans who worked out there when you were there?
They were mostly in the glass house area or over in shipping.
Okay.
Yeah, there weren't too many in the stamping area.
Okay.
Most of the people from the stamping area, wonderful group of people, they came down from Jamestown, Tennessee.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And a story that I'll have to tell you,
Yeah.
which they actually did. Ball Brothers used to send flyers down to Jamestown in that area, and people would get on the train and come to Muncie.
Okay.
Well, this one evening, while the conductor, the train stopped at Muncie, and he said, "Muncie," nobody got off. He said, "Muncie," nobody got off. He said, "Ball Brothers," and everybody got off.
That's great. That's a good story. How about, were there a lot of women working out there?
Yes.
Okay. Was that because of the kind of jobs that they could get there?
Yes. Now, there were actually more women than there were men. The man ran the presses, such as that, and the women did all of the lids and rings. This one picture that I gave you,
Yeah.
what those girls would do, they would pick those lids up and they would flip every other one.
Okay.
Now, how on earth they did it, I don't know. But
So that was looked upon, I would guess, as a pretty good job for a woman in Muncie at that time.
with the bonus, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Got them up to a wage fact, but they worked for everything they got.
So there was, is it fair to say then, and I'm asking you now to contrast this with when we were over at Delco Remy, that there were a greater percentage of women working at Ball Brothers than, say, over at Delco Remy?
No, because a lot of your lines over at Delco Remy.
Oh, okay.
But I will say this, the people at Ball Brothers worked. I mean, they worked.
Yeah.
They were all conscientious. They tried to put out a good product. I got over, and I was 46 years old, as I told you, when I went to work at Delco Remy. You don't get hired at 46 years of age. When I got over here, they put me in the model shop.
Oh, okay.
The model shop was the experimental. I didn't know it was the best job in Delco Remy.
Yeah. That's pretty high-end stuff.
But
Yeah.
I was in the model shop. The thing that I saw immediately, I had fellas in there that tried to get me to go out where the snack area was and play euchre.
Oh. Yeah.
Now you had a 20-minute break for lunch.
Yeah.
You can't play a game of euchre in
Right.
20 minutes.
Right.
I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And they didn't like me too well.
Okay. Yeah.
This went on, and they had a young committeeman, and I was working nights, and he come back, and he was nice. He came back one night and talked to me. He said, "These guys in here don't like you at all." I said, "Well, I can't help it." And I said, "You know, I'm not in here to be liked or disliked. I'm in here to make a living for my family."
Yeah.
And I said, "I can't play a game of euchre in 20 minutes," and I said, "I'm not going to do it." A week later, he came back and he brought the vice president of the union with him, a man that I had known, and we had worked together on projects for probably 15 years. And he got back nearly to us, and he looked over and he said, "My God, is this the guy you're talking about?" And the kid said, "Yeah." He says, "He's a nice guy, but you know, he won't go along." And he said, "Let me tell you this." He said, "Don't take him too far." And he asked why, and he went ahead and told him. He said, "Now, he's forgotten more about the union than you'll ever know." He said, "Leave him alone." But this was it. We had people that would come in, so help me, and this still bothers me today. But I didn't blame the union all for this. They had people that would come in the morning, ring in, and then turn around and leave and come back at lunchtime.
Oh, God. That's what happens when the union's that big.
Well, but the company knew this.
Yeah.
So they were at fault as much as the union. Now, everything was blamed on the union.
Yeah. Right.
But all they had to do was fire that individual, not bring him back. They had the right to do that.
But they didn't do it.
They didn't do it.
When you were at Ball Brothers, did you have any regularly called strikes or wildcats?
The only strike that I ever had was the one at Middletown.
Okay.
Now there's 2 or 3 times when we negotiated contract, I put an international rep in the hospital. We negotiated this one contract in the middle of the winter. Cold, oh, it was cold. We negotiated out at Holiday Inn. Company was down at this end and we were up at the other end. And I knew that there was 5 cents to be had. Now, it's 5 cents anymore, don't make any difference. Back then, made a lot of difference.
That's 5 cents an hour, though.
Yeah, 5 cents an hour. So, it was about 10 o'clock, and company sent their representative down to our room again, and he said, this is as far as we're going to go. And I said, well, Jack, I'm going to tell you. I said, I want you to go back, tell the rest of them in the meeting back there how they want to bank their furnaces, who they want to come in to bank them. I said, whoever you want, we'll do it. I said, well, because you shut a glass plant down, you got problems. I said, whatever needs to be done. But I said, when you come back up here, that's all of it. And I told him 10 cents. Not going to back away from it.
10 cents?
I told him that's what we had to have. But you always... Well, he came back, and when he came back, he was sweating. And he said, Charlie, he said, we'll give you the list of names. He said, now we can go a nickel. I'll never forget it.
And you said, okay.
I know. No.
Oh, you didn't say okay.
No. I told him, I said, well, let us think about it. So he went back down, and about 15 minutes later we called him and said, okay, we've got an agreement.
Okay. Well, the last questions I have is, when I came to Muncie to join the Ball State faculty in the late 1960s, a friend of mine in Michigan, where I was living at that time, had been in Muncie for a while. And he said to me, you know, Warren, why do you want to go to Muncie, Indiana? That's a really tough union town. Do you think that was a good description of Muncie in the late 1960s?
Sure I did.
What's your definition of a tough union town?
Well, I'll give you an example. The hotel over there. Is it Robert?
Yeah, well, it's had various names.
Okay.
Yeah.
They had girls working there in the dining room that weren't making anything at all. And they had an international union come in here. I can't even remember who the union was now, and they wanted to organize the Roberts Hotel. These girls weren't making anything at all, and they were working their cans on.
Yeah.
This is a no man's land. And when I say a no man's land, this is something that's not covered by federal law and it's not covered by state law.
Right.
You can do about anything you want to on a strike like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember it or not, but we put, and this was actually the unions against the Chamber of Commerce. Okay. Just exactly what it was.
Yeah.
We put a double picket line around the Hotel Roberts. And never caused any trouble. Tried to be very nice to everybody. Well, they had dances, they had bands come in there that were not union, they had dances and everything else. They stood up and filled sacks with water and would throw them out on us. Well, this one night, Schultz, who was a captain, and
this is the police captain?
No, the other fellow was a sergeant. Anyway, they told us to move our cars. We didn't argue. We got out and started moving our cars. And one of the fellows in the Union was crippled. They took and threw him up over the hood of the car. And of course nobody did anything. We wouldn't have moved for the world. Well, they wound up and they arrested every Union leader in Muncie. Took down to jail. They couldn't figure out what to charge us with, but anyway, no. So I called Tobe to him. He was mayor. Tobe was in Washington, D.C. at the mayor's conference. Tobe was very unhappy.
I could imagine.
Told him to get back to Muncie right away, and he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, you got every Union president in Muncie in jail." So Tobe come back, and both of those officers wound up walking a beat down on South Walnut Street.
Not the smartest career move.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they did organize the hotel. I mean, there's nothing to be proud of.
Yeah, right.
But this shows the
solidarity
that we had together.
Then. Yeah. Well, why do you think so much of that's changed? Because you wouldn't describe Muncie today as
You know
a
where
tough
we made our
town.
mistake?
Yeah.
You know where the unions actually made their mistake? Remember when the controllers were all fired?
Yeah, Reagan. Yeah.
And we talked about this. Every union in the United States should have done what they do once in a great while over in France.
Shut down the country.
We should have shut everything down. From that day on.
That's funny because I've done about 11 of these interviews now, and you're about the 7th or 8th person who's mentioned that same thing about the air traffic controllers and Reagan. That was a real turning point.
That's right.
In American Union history. As I said, those are all the formal questions I have, but at the end of my interviews, I give all my interviewees an opportunity to add anything you want to add about this subject and your career.
The thing I'd like to add is this, that I really enjoyed all of the years that I was in the union and the people that I worked with, both management and the unions. I never had a lot of trouble. I'll tell you one more thing. This is Ralph Edgar, who he and I got along all right, and he was anti-union, as anti-union could be. He came from the steel workers, and that's what he came there for. He called one day, and I would never, as I said, I'd never meet with a union or a company person unless I had a union representative. And he called Les Barlow, my foreman, one day, and he said, "Les," he said, "I want Charlie to come down to the cafeteria." This was our cafeteria, not the company's.
Right.
He said, "I'm down here waiting on him. Tell him not to bring anybody because it's not union."
Oh.
So I went down, I got down there, and he had a cup of coffee sitting across the table. And Ralph said, "Charlie," he said, he said, "we've battled a lot, had a number of negotiations, but," he said, "when we walked out of the room," he said, "we always walked out friends." He said, I'm a damned," now this is what he said, he says, "I'm a damned alcoholic," which he was, and he was a brilliant man with it. So I'm getting ready to go to Cleveland Clinic for open heart surgery. And this is back when open heart surgery was something new. He said, now why I've got you down here, he said, I want to look at you eyeball to eyeball. And I want to tell you right now, there is absolutely no animosity between us. He never had to do that, never had to say that. We negotiated a contract after that. His wife wanted to go to Italy. They went to Italy, and they were in northern Italy, and he had a heart attack when he died. She brought him a beautiful casket. You know, their taper.
Yeah.
It was a cherry casket. Couldn't get the casket out of the country, and she's having trouble getting him out. She was having all kinds of trouble. Yeah. I got on a phone conversation with Birch By and Vance Harkey. Yeah. And I knew both of them well. Yeah. And I said, now, she's over there all by herself. She needs all the help she can get. Now cut all the red tape and get her home. I said, I don't want anybody to ever know who did this. About 3 years later, which was nothing unusual, I was working on a great big die, and here Ed Ball come up behind me. He said, Charlie, and I turned around and I said, yes, Ed. He said, I don't know how to say this. I said, like you always have, what is it? I had no idea what he was going to talk about. Well, one of their people had gone to Vance Harkey's office, and his administrative assistant had told him the story that was not supposed to be told. And he said, Charlie, he said, you know, he said, we've got attorneys, we've got everything in the world. And he said, I don't know what we were not thinking about to leave that poor woman over there. And I said, Ed, I said, you know, I said, we were good friends. And he kept on, and these are the words I used, and I'll never forget Ed's face. I said, Ed, I do the same thing for you.
So would I. I would have done the same thing for Ed Ball, too. Well, thank you very much for participating in my project.
All right.
I really appreciate it.